Hello, everybody, and welcome back. First things first, we'll talk about today the severe weather threat lasting from Iowa down into Texas. Then we'll move on to day two with a large severe weather threat over much of Mississippi, if not the entire state, Alabama, Louisiana, and surrounding areas. And then the end of this system as it moves across the Atlantic seaboard. Let's begin first with today. We're going to focus our concentration here in Oklahoma because that's where a lot of you are listening from. Also, where the greatest tornado threat is up through central into eastern Oklahoma and parts of southeastern Kansas as well. The wind threat lasting into Iowa and the hail threat beginning on the early side of the storm from Texas all the way up into portions of South Dakota and Minnesota. So let's take a look at what the radar is going to look like around midnight tonight. We see, as compared to yesterday, if you watched yesterday's video, the line of storms was a lot more cohesive than it is here. So a lot more scattered, which means there is a greater potential for some supercellular activity, although still not anything too crazy. That's very notable here on the NAN. We can see these line segments in cells rather than a cohesive line throughout the outlook area identified by the Storm Prediction Center. If we take a look here at the ARRR sounding, a little technical analysis here, we see that there's some curving with height at first, and then it remains relatively nothing too crazy. But still increasing with height, so that is at least some vertical shear going on there. I'll talk more about that once we get to the East Coast. Cape values, nothing too crazy. Shear values, nothing to write home about either. The NAM model is much more favorable. Just real quickly, looking at the dew point here, 60 versus 64 and about the same air temperature. That's a big difference when it comes to the moisture in the air associated with these storms. We also have a much larger curve here in the first few kilometers of the atmosphere, that red line. And so that's very notable and more helpful for the formation of tornadoes. Cape values also much higher, shear values higher as well. And so with that, we will have a potential for some interesting weather around midnight tonight here in central Oklahoma. But again, it could be nothing. It kind of depends on the timing. As we see here, it could be to the south. It could be weak. It could, of course, be stronger as well. So all things are on the table here. Moving on to Wednesday, tomorrow, we're mainly focusing on the southeast, all the way up into portions of Illinois and Indiana as well, and residuals over from the evening storm tonight. Taking a look at the radar around sunset time in Mississippi and Alabama, we see a line of severe thunderstorms located through Tennessee, probably some severe, sub-severe storms there, and then a very strong line of storms into central Mississippi, and then another line of storms located across the same area. Some of these areas in central Mississippi and Alabama could be getting a 1-2 punch. This first line of severe storms and a second line trailing behind it. Down to the south here, we see more scattered convective activity rather than a line. And as has been the theme here, remember, scattered activity means tornadoes are more of a concern. Linear activity means wind is more of a concern. If we take a look here at this, we can really see that to the south of the outlook area, severe tornadoes are possible. We're looking at a 15% chance within 25 miles of any point in that red area having a tornado, and 25 miles within any area within the hatched area, that is that black area that's dashed out, of having an EF2 or greater tornado there. So again, a very large potential here. Wind also a huge concern, as I highlighted, and as is obvious from a line of storms that looks like this. Wind is going to be a major concern. Would not be surprised if we see an upgrade in either of these categories tomorrow as it becomes the day of the event, especially if things evolve today in Oklahoma as we expect them to. Hail is a minor concern, but still is there nonetheless. The main thing is a wind-based threat, and then to the south, the QLCS tornado threat, as well as some potential supercellular activity to the south of that. And it's much the same here today in Oklahoma, just a much lesser threat than it is here in Mississippi and Alabama on Wednesday. Taking a look at the sounding, this is from one of the supercells at the bottom. We see good favorable dew points, good amount of cape, high amount of shear, big curved topograph, hence why the shear is high, and overall very favorable atmosphere for tornadic conditions, hence the 15% plus significant chance from the Storm Prediction Center. Moving on to the NAM, this is same model, but higher up. So this one's being taken here along this line of storms instead of within the supercells. We still see a curved topograph, very curved, very impressively curved. Honestly, shear very high, dew point high, cape not the highest, but still pretty high. The main threat here, of course, going to be wind, but like I said, embedded tornadoes certainly possible, as is evidenced by the curved topograph there. As we move on to the final day of this outbreak, that is on Thursday, we have two areas of slight weather, severe weather, slight chance of severe weather located across Georgia and the Florida Panhandle, as well as the Mid-Atlantic, and we'll continue to watch both of those areas with concern. Let's take a look at the Mid-Atlantic here around sunset Friday night. We see a broken line of sub-severe to severe storms, basically from New York, where they're not going to be as severe. By the time they reach Maryland, we could see some severe weather into North Carolina as well. There's more activity to the south of this in a preceding line, and there's also convective activity earlier in the day, over Georgia and Florida, but that's not being discussed here. We're just taking a look at this line, and as we see here, tornado remains a threat, but we don't have a curved topograph. Instead, we have a little curve and then a straight line outward. And what that means is that all these wind barbs are facing in the same direction with height, but they're at varying different degrees. So here it's only 35 knots, but by the time we get here, it's 95 knots. And so that's 60 knot shear with height. And as we can see here, from the surface to 6 kilometers up, it's 84 knots of shear and 100 knots of shear as we head up to 8 kilometers in the atmosphere, and relatively almost no negative energy going on. So as we can see here, a very favorable environment, nothing too crazy, but still something we're going to want to keep an eye on, basically from the Maryland-Pennsylvania border down into northern North Carolina, where that slight risk is. I do see a very decent potential of some severe activity, including tornadoes, but mainly wind, as is the case here. Tornadoes and wind, the main threat for the southeast on Tuesday. Then the main threat here in Oklahoma is going to be that wind threat. However, isolated tornado or two, as well as some large hail events or two, especially on the beginning initialization of the storms, are possible. That's all for now. Chris Hickson and for other Catholic PDA.